Thanks for coming.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for coming. I'm Cindee Travis Klement. I'm a Houston-based environmental artist. I've been a maker my entire life, and kind of a perfect storm of events happened to me that changed me, where I decided that all my work would support the positive things we can all do in the environment. I think it was life-changing for me to realize that we don't really have an environmental problem, we have a social problem. So my work is about exposing these things that we can do that will help mitigate the problems that we have in the environment. There were basically three events that happened, I think, that has made my journey unique and given me this special voice to talk about these things. One is I'm from West Texas, just south of the Dust Bowl, and I've lived where it used to be coastal prairie, so tall grass covered that whole area, but with the industrial agriculture, the land became depleted from plants, and so it can no longer hold water, and the water runs across, and that's the environment that I spent most of my life with. Moving to Houston, the opposite side of Texas, which is coastal prairie, and made for soaking up rainwater. The native plants here are made for holding water in the ground 10 to 18 feet and returning it to the aquifer, returning it back to the ocean. With Hurricane Harvey, the second event, I realized that our landscape in Houston responds like the desert. And I'm not an environmentalist, I'm just a human who's looking at these things, questioning, trying to understand what's going on and what's happening and how to leave a better world for my grandkids. So that was disturbing to me that our landscape works like that. And kind of the third thing that happened, so I was building a body of work about Hurricane Harvey, the heroes of Hurricane Harvey, when the first bee went on the endangered species list. And that was a little unsettling. As I was working on my Hurricane Harvey work, I started researching the bee situation. So it was about a year. Like, I'm binge watching bee movies. On the 4th of July, I'm signing up on entomologists' websites and reading all these articles, and all I hear about is the industrial situation of the honeybee, which that's all really I knew because that's all we read about. And then one day I heard scientists say, entomologists, maybe we're worried about the wrong bee. And I've been hyper-focusing on bees for a year. And to be the wrong bee, I didn't even know we had other bees. And that's part of the problem is people don't know these things. And so I started researching, and there's 20,000 different bee species that are native. And actually, the home beekeeper is really hurting the situation because we have so few native plants that there's not enough pollen to go around when there's 10,000 honeybees. They're aggressive. So those three things kind of set me down this journey where I decided to commit my work to telling these stories. So I've been looking at wind erosion from living in the Southwest, and then I started learning about the soil. And I had been my daughter's environmental chairman, parent chairman at her high school when I first moved to Houston doing cleanup at Buffalo Bayou. And I asked the other families who had lived in Houston, like third generation Houstonians, why they called it Buffalo Bayou. And no one knew, and I don't know specifically why they called it that. But with a little research, I found that the last herd of bison went by just after the Alamo. I thought that was interesting. So I kind of kept that in my back pocket and felt like people should know that. When my kids went away to school, I started creating more art and learning more, and kind of this whole world of learning about the bison and regeneration just has manipulated my practice, and that's been one little thing from desertification to the coastal prairie to how soil and bees, all these things are interconnected. So kind of now, I've been telling all these stories about the bees and the soil and also the water, and now the interconnectedness, but then also I'm a social sculptor, and I tell these stories because I believe we can make a difference. It's the small acts, the power of the small acts. The other part of my work, or the latest part of my work, like what you're seeing behind me, is the success stories, the small things we can all do, but also we need to have hope, and we need to see that there's been some amazing environmental things that have already happened, and we need to continue those things. We need to tell those stories. And we're not in a time where we're getting good information. We're not in the storytelling time where I'm passing down from one generation to the next these stories about the natural landscape that other civilizations have done. Now we're getting our stories from the news and the press, and they're not really happy stories. So having tell these success stories as opposed just to the negativity that happens is really important, what I'm really trying to focus now. However, I do keep telling stories about soil and water, and it's all intertwined, and I can't really separate it.
First of all, I would like to thank you for being so supportive.
It's a pleasure and it's an honor, I think, being privileged. To me, privilege is having the ability to do for others. And it is incredibly healing to learn about nature and spread these ideas and words. I love speaking to young kids because they so often are just so depressed about the environment that they're paralyzed and they don't make efforts. And I tell them, well, I'm jealous of you because you're really lucky. You're in a generation. My generation, we didn't have the microscopes to see what was living in the soil, to really understand it. They thought that the healthy soil was deep, but really you build soil from the top down with animal waste and decomposing organic matter. But this new generation, you have the science and you have the knowledge of the mistakes that we've made, and you can get it right. You just need to make the changes. I often read that the intelligence of the future is not like the smartest guy in the room or the most knowledgeable of everything in the world, but people who will get the right information and make changes the fastest. That is the intelligence of the future, and I really believe that. We can fix the environment really quickly with small steps, and there's really nothing stopping us other than public policy and social beliefs and social norms and willing to step out of the pack.
Thank you. What was the journey? How did you start? What's the process?
Well, so the other kind of underlying characteristic, I think, of my life that's led me to practice this type of art is I had a long fascination of where really healthy food came from. In the mid-90s, my husband became type 2 diabetic, and that's a whole nother story, but that event, and my kids had a lot of food allergies, led me to really look at how food was different now than it used to be. And that's what led me to regenerative agriculture, which is one of the principles, main characteristics that I use in all my pieces. To me, regeneration is a life philosophy, kind of a way of living, not just eating and landscaping. But so I started studying what farmers and ranchers were doing in the food industry, and learned about that there's a way to raise food that actually builds the soil and regenerates it. as opposed to industrial agriculture that uses petrochemicals and causes a lot of pollution. And I don't think we should be eating food where cows are force-fed food that they would never eat, and just the whole production of that grain industry. So I started going to ranches that were using principles from regenerative agriculture, where they are rebuilding the soil, like the certified ranch lands in near Austin. Actually, is where I first started going, Rome Ranch. And they invited me to do a roundup with them and spend time with the bison and really get to watch the process. And the first time I went there, you could see a little grass, but mainly dirt. And they just put, I think, 40 head of bison on the property. And I went for the first few years, like every 6 months, and stayed on the property and watched how it was changing. And so I got to see the magic that happens when you have the certified land and you're just gonna reseed it. It could take 100 years to rebuild that land. But if you bring animals back, ruminants, grazing animals, whether it's bison, goat, sheep, whatever animal it may be, you keep them tightly in a herd as if there were predators. So the kind of the problem we had with ranching, like in the early 1900s, is we had gotten rid of the predators, and without the predators, animals act differently. They spread out. They maybe overeat. I'm not sure if that's what they do, but they spread out. They eat basically everything. But if you use these little portable wires and you keep them in a pack, so in a pack they're safe from predators, and they're eating here, and they're dropping their waste here. So one bison may drop 40 pounds of dung in a pasture as it's eating. So it's consuming energy, transfer it in its body, and then dropping it back where it took, so that it takes and it gives back. So in that bison's waste are microbes, and those microbes feed a little bit larger animals and nutrients, and working its way up from the tiniest microbe to then dung beetles and box turtles. And then when you have the insect population, then the birds come back. And so when you have the flocks returning with the herds of bison, it's just really magical. So I think it was about year 3, and I had been at Rome Ranch, and the grass had been, just barely over the dirt. And by year 3, it's somewhere between my knees and my waist, and there's insects flying out with every step, and it's hot. So when the ground gets hot, air moves up, that makes that grass start moving. So like the prairie is just this wave of wind and cooling, and every step you take, then flocks of birds fly out. And that's how the planet, and so that it's kind of scary as an artist to go into that area, but at the same time, I feel like living in balance with nature should be easy, and it just takes some thought. One is understanding the past, but looking forward to the future. So, I make mistakes, but I learn from them. We all
do, and we learn. It's a learning process.
Yeah, it's a learning process, and actually sometimes the mistakes are the best things you can learn.
Oh yes, that's fascinating. First of all, I would like to thank you for sharing, taking care of environment.
I think it's really important to, I never set out really to be an artist or to be in the area of social sculpture or an environmentalist. I just was kind of living my life, looking for ways that maybe I can make a difference. And then it just kind of unfolded. I think really, I've had times in my life where I really tried to control what my destiny was, and that can be really hard. You have this idea and you really go with it and try to make it happen. And this has come fairly easy, and I've been trying to really listen to like what my path would be. And it's just kind of really unfolded. And I think that when it comes to nature, yeah, you have to be in it. You can't just think about it from a distance, but you have to really get in it. You have to get on the ground. You have to get dirty. But just sometimes just sitting in it quietly and listening. Yeah, there's just so much we can learn. It's really endless. But yeah, that's really important, I think, for living life.
Do you remember the aha moment? And what was your first art piece?
Well, so living my early years in isolated West Texas, I've always been a maker. I think remember when whining to my mother about like someone to play with, and she would give me macaroni in a cigar box. And so I've always made things, and that's kind of my go-to happy place, is just to make things with my hands. So I can't really remember not making things or kind of a first thing, but I think there was a moment when I'm like, I have this, my life story has put me in this very interesting space to see things that other people aren't seeing. Like that Houston, I believe, can have a very special role in healing the planet. We're semi-tropical, and we're people from all over the world, so the things that we learn and we do spread quickly to the rest of the other countries. So I don't really remember the exact moment, but it kind of started occurring to me that I had this special opportunity to see things from my past experiences that other people weren't really seeing. And I also have a background in commercial real estate, so I understand a bit of business and how to start a new idea. I did site selection for retailers, like how do you start that? And so a lot of these ideas that I have are new ideas, and like how do you start them, and seeing Houston as also a great asset for starting a new idea. So I just started seeing that it was, and I had an unusual set of background characteristics that were providing me a unique vision.
Thank you so much. When you begin your new art piece, do you start from image? What is the process of creating your art?
Usually it comes from, like maybe I'm doing some research, I'm reading a book about some type of, like about water or soil or food. Generally some type of research, or I'll have met someone, or I've listened to a podcast, and I'll have a new idea of, generally it's something that kind of disturbs me, like something like, this isn't right. And so I start thinking of, well, for example, I was doing a living sculpture at the Lawndale Art Center, and ended up being for 3 years, and almost every Saturday I would go and talk to families about regenerative agriculture and native plants and pollinators and all these things. And I would meet families whose children were seeing their first butterfly, and they were a little terrified. When you're 4 years old and you've never seen a butterfly, because you live in a city that our parks are box shrubs, chain link fences, and basketball courts, it's terrifying for them, and that was really unsettling. And so I was like, this could be fixed. And so I'm starting a new project. I've not talked about it yet on social media or anything, but I'll be doing it with Hope Stone and Caroline Craddock, who's a landscape designer at Clemente Martinez Elementary School. It has a pre-K, and the project it's a social sculptor, is passionate for pre-K. And I've gone through the different properties that I've done living sculptures and taken cuttings from vines and the passion vine, the trumpet vine, all kinds of native vines that are really great for pollinators and have great root systems. And I've been growing them on the patio in little pots at my home. And next week we'll be planting them on the chain link fence around at the school, and they'll be developing a curriculum that goes with it. And the hope is that when these kids, pre-Kers, walk into their gates of their school every day, that butterflies will take off and surround them. And what a great way to start your day, right? And that they will learn about regeneration, and it goes into so many social contexts about living. And then the following year, that those kids and those teachers can do cuttings and start propagating plants and give them to another school. So that's kind of an example of I'll get an idea because something bothers me or find something interesting, and then I start thinking about what materials best talk about this or will fix this problem.
What is your favorite medium?
Well, right now it's paper and watercolor. I am in love with this process that I came up with recently, which is behind us. And what I do is so these pieces, they tell the story, the success story of, this is the third and fourth of 4 pieces, and the first 2 tell the story of the sandhill cranes, which I feel those 2 are a little more powerful than these 2. And the sandhill cranes were down to 50 birds in the early 1900s from losing habitat and losing wetlands and from being overhunted. And the hunters pivoted. They didn't want to lose the birds, so they started putting in regulations and rules and licensings for hunting the sandhill cranes. And they started raising money and building wetlands for them, and they're no longer endangered. And to me, that's really inspiring because we often see the hunters as the villains, and actually a lot of the environmental work that is done is because of the hunters' passion for nature. So in this process, I wanted to tell this story. And so I started researching sandhill cranes, and my mother is 95 years old. Thank you, Mimi. And when she retired, she started traveling and taking pictures of birds and estuaries. And so I asked her if I could use her photos for reference, and my 95-year-old mother emailed me a couple of hundred photos. Which is amazing that she knows how to do that, right?
It is amazing.
So I used those as reference material for the first 2. The second 2, I used these 2, which are on the roseate spoonbills, which is also an amazing story. So the roseate spoonbills were almost lost because of the women's hat industry. The pink feathers were, so desired that we almost lost the roseate spoonbills, so women can have pink feathered hats. But they too have been brought back. I think there is one group near Louisiana that is still endangered. But in this part of Texas and the coastal prairie, they are no longer endangered. And they're a really cool bird. I mean, they've got this big spoons, and they just kind of spoon them back and forth, collecting this matter that grows in these estuaries. And so these works I'm really excited about this whole process I developed to tell the story, which they live in watered areas, so I wanted water to be a part of it. I took photos from my mother and screenshots from videos of birds I could find online flying. And I drew the design on large 7-foot by 9-foot papers on the wall, and then I created another set of paper the same size on the floor here in my studio. And then I would take a section, maybe about 2 feet by 2 feet, and tear the design up into like the little feathers or the blades of grass or the beaks, and would then glue it onto the other paper. And then once I had the whole 7 foot by 9 foot piece torn up and re-glued down, I would put it back on the wall, and then I started adding color, but then I used a garden sprayer like people will use for pesticides in their yard, but I'm using the water to manipulate the color to let the drawing kind of appear through these cracks in the works in paper. So I love that process because I get to be a little bit controlled, but then at the same time I just have to let go and just tear and glue, and it's kind of a meditative process and very loose. I try to have it be wild, and where you see that, like the patterns in the feathers and the patterns in the grass and the patterns in the sky and the water, they're all intermixed and interdependent, and you have to really look at them, I think, to see what the image is. As when you're in nature, you have to stop and really look. You can't just walk by a garden and enjoy the wildlife. You have to take a moment and look deeply.
Thank you. Do you remember your first art piece being exhibited? And what was it?
Well, so that is a really funny story. So I was making, I was interested in where healthy food came from, but I was making faux bois furniture, and I wanted to kind of take it to the next level, and I had read that steel, concrete, and bronze are temporally compatible. So I thought, wow, bronze would be really cool to add to the furniture, the faux bois furniture. So I emailed, I just Googled bronze sculptor, Houston, Texas, and this woman's name came up, and I emailed her to see if she would like an intern. And I was 50-something, I've only been in this world for about 10 years, so. And she did not respond. And then about a year later, I saw some bronze somewhere, and I thought, wow, I really like that medium. I think I would really like. So I emailed her again, and she says, it's interesting that you have emailed me today, because she was in a bar that night before and ran into the man who taught me to weld and how to make faux bois. And she said, I met this woman that I think you taught, and she wants to intern for me. And he says, if she'll work for you, you should get her. I think I have a pretty good work ethic. And so I get this message like at 10 o'clock in the morning, and she says, if you're still interested, when would you like to come? And I said, well, I'll be there in about 15 minutes. And so I interned with her making a bronze sculpture for the Jewish Community Center. And then she sent me home with a little piece of clay and said, go make something. And so I made I should have it right here. I made a little bird. And then she took me to her foundry, and they cast it for me for $50. And then so I made 2 birds. And I went to the foundry and I asked them to cast it for me, and they wanted $500. And I was like, and they were explaining to me this whole process and why they had to charge more for that. And I was like, I don't understand the lingo they're using. And weirdly, that night, the Glacel catalog ended up in my mail and on my countertop, and I saw a foundry class. So I emailed them and asked if I could take it. I didn't have the formal sculpting background, but I knew how to weld, and I worked in concrete. And the professor at the time, the teacher, David Medina, was familiar with faux bois. His wife loved it. And he said, yeah, sure, you can take the class. And so I started learning about bronze then, and I did what's called a direct cast of a hat. And making for 10 years I was always making a bronze hat. So that's part of my work that looks at wind and soil erosion that I call GUST, which is a series of hats blowing in the wind from that first hat. But so I'm in the foundry and working, just working and chit-chatting with a young man who was representing the airport's collection at the time, Tommy Gregory, and he really liked the hat. We kind of made friends, and not too long after that, he emailed me and said that the city was having a call for the portable works collection for the airport, and that I should submit a hat. And so I did, and so that was my first sculpture, and the city of Houston bought it. So.
Do you remember the feeling?
Well, it was kind of disbelief, and it was actually a few years before I was comfortable using the word artist with my name. And in fact, I think it was at some event where I was with Tommy, and he introduced me to somebody as artist Cindee Klement, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I've gotten much more comfortable with that term. But yeah, so
I feel you. I think all of us go through those kind of emotions.
I guess coming, if you've been in the art world your whole life, but coming into it after middle age, it's a little different, and it seems I feel very honored to be able to use that title. I feel like artists have a really special role in society, and that's part of really what drives me to continue with what I'm doing, besides just that I'm really passionate about it. But I think having new ways to think can be very difficult for society. And to start it in an art venue, or when we're calling it art, helps us get comfortable with it, and helps us get accepting of it. So I feel like what I'm doing, I feel like it's really important.
It is. What do you want the viewer feel looking at your art pieces?
I think if there's just like one message that I feel is important, I mean, there are really so many, but for some reason, what I'm thinking about right now is, I think one of the issues we have with why we've not been more successful right now in solving some of these environmental problems is the language that we use. If you don't use the right word, you can't really talk about the right thing. And because of the energy industry, the word sustainable is used and talked about all the time in the environmental world. And I think sustainable is really important for the oil industry and the energy industry. We need sustainability in those areas. But when it comes to the environment and a relationship with the environment, so often when I'm talking to a group, I'll say to them, so let me ask you about because with the environment, it's about our relationship with the environment. So I'll ask you, if you have the choice to be in a relationship with somebody, and you're going to describe your relationship as sustainable, does that feel good? Sustainable? You want your relationship sustainable? Or do you want a relationship that's regenerative, that person in your life makes your life better, and that the things you do makes their life better? That's regeneration. So I think to not use the word sustainable unless we're talking about new forms of energy that we want to be sustainable, to use the word regenerative, I think that changes the mindset of how we look at everything. And I guess if I had somebody'd say you can only say one thing, that I'd have to say, what relationship do you want with the planet? Sustainable or regenerative?
My last question, if you would collaborate with anyone, any artist from the beginning of the humanity, who would that be?
Well, I think for me, any artist. I would love to collaborate with any artist, and often when I get to choose like who I'm going to collaborate with. So recently, I was in a show in an art collective I'm in at Throughline, and we were, as a collective, we each picked somebody to work with and do a two-person show. And there's a lot of people that look at different things that are environmental, that you would maybe think that I would be a natural to work with, and it would be. But what's really fascinating to me when I look at nature and I look at landscapes is the most beautiful things happen in those unexpected moments, those crossovers, things that weren't planned, and that you wouldn't know that they would go so well. So I approached J.R. Rokovich, who creates work that is, in my mind, a little more mathematical looking, a little more controlled and geometric. And my work is messier and more organic. And I proposed to him, I had these little videos, and I think it might be interesting to do these they're underwater videos that I take in my home cement pond. And it went from there, and I think it ended up really being a fascinating and very interesting looking exhibit. And it was because we're visually very different. I think we're very like-minded in many areas. But so I don't know if I could pick one artist, but I think I would love to collaborate in an art way with some scientists, and especially this week, I've always been, one of my heroes is Jane Goodall. And to talk with her and come up with some ideas to help tell the stories, the things that she's learned through nature, that would be amazing. And the other person is Charles Darwin, just because he's the first guy who really started studying earthworms, and that's the beginning, right? I mean, you got to have the earthworms. So to find a way to be a little bit more poetic about earthworms, that would have been fascinating.
I love it. Thank you so much. Your art is going to make a change.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate your support. I mean, we can continue telling these stories and making this work, and if people don't elevate it through social media, through exhibitions or writings, it's not going to have the impact that it could have. I really need more environmental writers of the art world, and environmental curators that are interested in the art world to elevate these ideas. So I'm very grateful for what you're doing, Diana. This is very meaningful. Thank you. Hey, welcome to my studio. So I don't really know where to begin, except for when you look outside. This is my third living sculpture sequel. And right now it's in the early succession stage. A lot of these plants are here because there's lead in the soil or arsenic. My Hurricane Harvey work, the majority of the work is about the guys that got off their couch and the women that went in and pulled people out of water, the heroes, the Hurricane Harvey heroes. But then at the end, I wanted to do work that has to do with the animals, because I am very passionate about animals and in rural areas. So I did a body of, they're monoprints. That whole body of work pretty much is on monoprints. But I wanted to, that was being exhibited, and I felt it needed a sculpture, and I was going to do a guy carrying a goat because Picasso did a guy carrying a goat, and then was like, why would you want to do that? And I'd seen this video about this young family in Conroe, and the water was coming up, and their barn was beginning to flood, and they had two little girls whose favorite pet, two little girls with Down syndrome, whose favorite pet was this potbelly pig. And that dad, you know how big a potbelly pig is, right? Hoisted that pig up their stairs, and the mom videoed it. And so this is my interpretation of that man hoisting his daughter's pet pig up the stairs. And so it's welded steel, lath, like you would use when I make concrete furniture, or that people use in, when they tile a bathroom, and hydrostone, and baling wire, all kinds of wire that I might get at a hardware store. And to me, this is like the movement of the water. A lot of my work initially, before I got heavily into talking about the environment, was about time and movement. It's kind of interesting that now I'm in movement where it's social movement as opposed to just physical movement. Anyway, I love pigs. They're super smart animals. And I love that this was a true story. And I really admire that dad. You gotta love a dad that does that. This is a piece that I did about homeless and kind of turning a blind eye. You know, we walk by people all the time, and it's really hard to figure out. So this is concrete, basically very similar to my process for making the faux bois furniture, except it doesn't look like wood. This is meant to be kind of painful. This was inspired by the homeless people that I saw in Greece, and also referenced a lot of when they've had bombings and problems in Greece, they'd leave a lot of the wreckage. Where in Texas and in the US, we go in and rebuild things, and it was just kind of interesting to see all the scaffolding around the Parthenon and that type of thing that's left. But so initially that's what this piece was about, but I've shown it in Houston a few times, and I've changed the name, because I think as an artist you use work in the best way, where it makes the most sense. And now that I'm in more of a social area, since I created this piece, when this was exhibited, and I have money that when it's exhibited I pour out around the piece, and little kids would come up and put the money in the cup. And so I have these shoes here because at some point I'm going to create a sculpture of a little child putting maybe not the money, I think maybe a flower in the cup, but as a symbol of, there's some very passionate young people in our society, and people are looking, I think, in kinder ways and more humane ways and more supportive. And so that, to me, this piece I now call change. So it's very different than it used to be. And so this is my bison. He's 12 feet long, 6.5 feet tall, and weighs about 800 pounds. It's very stressful for me every time he moves. And again, it's the same armature as these others two. It's welded steel covered in lath. And then this is indigenous soil and dried native plants that I took cuttings from my home landscape and from Pierce Prairie and from Symbiosis, my living sculpture at the Lawndale Art Center. The birds are bronze and the dung is bronze. And I have mushrooms in the dung to kind of symbolize that how that what we think of as this like nasty waste thing is actually life. And without waste and decaying matter, we can't have new life. And how things are kind of like, it's kind of magical how they happen. When I first started making art at Glassell, I was kind of figuring out what materials I liked, and I don't hesitate to experiment. And so I would experiment when I was interested in a material, with birds. I kind of like to work life size, so bird is small, but also I felt like the material would translate larger, the same in a bird as it would. So I have birds from leftover plumbing, tubing, mouse cloth, baling wire, bronze with organic plants over it, bronze that was cast with coffee in the clay, I believe I had. This one was from toilet paper, cardboard. This is tools. That's a dead plant from my garden, and a hydrostone screen from a hardware store, pieces of wood that I chipped off a trunk, and found stone, roots, and more roots. This piece is a drawing of the Astrodome, and I decided to do that because with our urban landscapes, we've created this, what they call a heat dome. And when you have a heat dome, weather cannot move across because of the pressure from that the heat makes. So when the weather cannot move across, then you get 5 days of rain, and then you get flooding. Weather is supposed to move, and so the idea is that we're the Astrodome and the heat dome, kind of a play on words, but I use it just to remind me to talk about the heat dome, and it's a watercolor monoprint. This was the first collage type piece that I did, which I did like in 2014. But it's this process that I used on the bird pieces, the sandhill crane pieces, and the roseate spoonbills, where I collaged the paper and then put the color over it and let it run down, try to control it with the sprayer. The wire dogs, I'm a big Labrador owner, and I kind of started experimenting with movement and kind of the energy. These were some of my very first sculptures of what animals have this playful energy and a quiet energy. They were really, I think I learned my visual language with them, and it's a really easy material to work with, and it's very forgiving. If you don't like it, you just unwind it and rewire it. And actually, the more you use that wire, the better that wire gets. So this piece, it started with my interest in time and movement before I'd made the environmental jump. But this was inspired by a photo of my cousin, Andrew Irvin, who is the first chair violinist at the Arkansas Symphony. And the Arkansas Symphony had taken a photo of him with a slow release shutter, and so you get all this movement in the hands, and it was kind of I told him I love that photo on Facebook, and he said, you can use it for your work. And I was like, oh wow, that would be scary. I wonder if I can do that. And so I'm at, when you're in your 50s and 60s and you're making art, if you're not trying something scary, you're not going to find out what you can do. So I thought, okay, I'll try it. So this is plaster, welded steel, hydrostone, the same whole process. And the idea is that you would see the movement, also his concentration, but then the energy coming from his playing in the back. All these things are pretty heavy, so in my studio they live on dollies. That way I can move them around and rearrange when I need to. The piece above it, which is protected because I've been doing messy work over there, is a shadow piece. I don't have the capability in this space to put a light on it, but when it turns, you see the violins turn, and then what seems kind of like just abstract shapes will turn in, and you'll see his face. So kind of really to create a piece that looks like the movement of music and concentration, I actually did after with just the scraps. But it's one of my favorite pieces. I wish I had a light in it so you could see it. There's another dog piece. So here are the bronze hats. And the first one was just, a normal hat in a normal position that's at the airport. But then I started just twisting them and turning them. And I've never shown these, but my dream is to show 6 of them at a time. So they started in West Texas, kind of where my journey started, and then I use them to talk about, when people come to my studio, about the 6 principles of regeneration, and one is holistic. So yeah, I can tell you all the things you may have to do for the environment, and if it keeps you from doing your business or functioning in your business or in your home, then you're not going to do them. So you have to look at the whole, holistically. But then also the importance is, the second principle is to cover the ground, that the ground of the planet, since the soil is living, needs skin, it needs green plants, it needs to always be covered. So either cover it with living green plants or decaying plant matter or animal waste to protect the skin of the planet. So holistic, keep the ground covered, and animal impact. So besides the eating habits that stimulates the growth of the roots and stimulates new plants from like the seeds getting caught in the bison's fur or other animals. The animals have, like a bison has 2 hooves, so they're bihooved, and a bison has 8 hooves. So it's like coming in and gently breaking up the soil with 8 spades, like garden spades, with 800 pounds or 1,000 pounds of bison. So they break up the earth a little bit, which creates more little pockets for water to sit, to slow down. And what a big part of regeneration is slowing water so it can soak back into the planet. So that's the third one. And then a diversity of species, how I have the birds and a diversity of materials. You need a diversity of plants, and really diversity is kind of crucial in every area of regeneration. I think living in a society that diversity, there's so many lessons from landscape that goes to our social. So, and then also keeping a root in the ground. Anytime you disturb soil, you're releasing carbon. But it's also the roots and the mycelium that are the living network that help create this network underground. So those are the principles that I like to talk about when I show people the hats. I also just think they're really cool shapes. At my home, I have a few of them laying around on different coffee tables, and I also could show them on a wall using shadows. So this piece is linked, and a house was torn down in a neighborhood that I was walking by, and I often will walk through empty lots and look to see what's left, see what plants are growing, and this was just left over to the side, and this rotting stump and this chain link fence had grown through it, and I just thought it was gorgeous. And so I've added to it bills, because a lot of my work I talk about how the economic system is tied to the environment, and to talk about really how our urban landscapes, for me this piece linked, our urban landscapes are linked to wildlife, having that one feather there. But it wasn't easy to get in my car. It had been rained in a lot, so it was holding a lot of moisture. I took it to my studio, which was at Burmac at the time, got it out of my car and started cleaning it off. And so I'll never forget this, and I knew it at the time, but I will never forget it now. Rotting wood has more life in it than a living tree. And I started cleaning it, and all the life, all the insects and bugs that were living in it started coming out, and it wasn't the most pleasant moment in my work. And I felt guilty that I was taking away their home, but I know that this would have been hauled off at some point because they were building a big house there. This piece is interdependence, and it's kind of really the first piece I started looking at with having items from urban landscapes and seeing that our Texas is really important in the migratory pathway. So I see Texas, and we're also so big, as being very valuable. And also including the leaves, because leaves, we have this obsession right now of cleaning up leaves, backing them, and having them put in our garbage disposal system. So these are my latest works, watercolor and collage reliefs that talk about the migratory birds and the important conservation acts that saved them. So these are stories that we can look to and be really proud of how we've made changes. So I'm really excited to show these. They will be installed in an office building in Alabama, here in Houston, Texas. And I'll be able to give talks about these pieces at any time. They're really, the landlord is very supportive of my work and willing to help out in any way. And so it's open almost 6 days a week, all business hours. You can go in at any time. These were the first two, the sandhill cranes. Here's actually a picture of how these two are already installed, and these other two will go above. Then this probably is my first social piece of 5 women artists. And it was kind of a surprise to me to find out that women were under, their work was not collected as the same as men's. And I come from more of a public, big corporation experience and association, and how they in recent years have made real efforts to have equality for women. I was really surprised to learn about the arts and that women really haven't had the attention paid to them that they should. So anyway, that's what that piece is about. A joy to have in my studio, actually. And in this room is where I do my works in paper, and I kind of told the story about the bees. And with that story, once I finished the Hurricane Harvey work, I started researching the different bees in the United States Geological website, which anyone can use those images. They're made for people to use for art or for anything. So scientists or photographers go into the museums and get these dead, broken bees and photograph them with amazing cameras and lighting, and they're gorgeous. They're literally just jewels, and my work is nothing compared to the photos. But so I started doing, out of the 20,000 wild bees, my goal is to do 50. I have no idea how many I've done. This is half of what I've shown through the Weingarten Art Consultants. But so, for instance, this is Osmia texana. Without that bee, we don't have blueberries, folks. Like, these bees are the bees that provide our food. And many of them are generalists, but many of them are very specific. This one is Osmia algia. It's from Oregon, and what that bee is pollinates blackberries and raspberries. They're all really fascinating. I've done bees for people in India who've been reached out to me that they're making movies there. I think that the top one is the bee in India. This is Eastern carpenter bee. Let me think. It's been so long since I've made these. Oh, Southern carpenter bee. This is a male, and his eyes are lime green. So the males don't nest. So if you go out early in the morning, you might find a carpenter bee sleeping under a flower. Or you'll see them like under the flower, or their little booties sticking out of the bloom. And so they're really fascinating. This bottom one here is a South American bee. And when the British discovered him in South America, he's 2 inches long. Can you imagine a 2-inch long fuzzy bee flying by you? And they called him a big fluffy ginger, and I kind of just really loved that name, so I did that bee. So I just, on the bees I research, I find something interesting, or somebody will reach out to me and say, hey, I love this bee, will you do me a bee? So that's what this one is up here. That's a Bombus melana. I think, I can't remember. But anyway, this woman lives in Northwest US. And that's the bee, the bumblebee in her area. And with research, that bee is used for research in how color is transferred genetically. So bees are really fascinating. They're really all beautiful. And I try to, when I create my piece from these photos of the dead bees, I try to give them life and show maybe a little color of what they might be around. So very last, this piece is very important to me. This is my daughter-in-law who was pregnant with our second grandchild, and she was with my son who was getting horse manure for their garden. And she was very pregnant and standing there in this horse that she did not know and had never ridden and did not know her, but the woman that did take care of this horse had recently had a baby, and this horse went right up to my daughter-in-law and pressed his nose against that baby, which is amazing that we do not even think how much these animals are aware of, and to start thinking about that is just a fascinating opportunity. I want to thank you guys for coming. It's been such an honor to show my studio, to share this space. I'm really open to talking to people, and if you're interested and want to visit, please reach out to me. And Diana, thanks so much. You are amazing. What you're doing is so helpful.